Hi, I'm Debdutta, and welcome to today's episode of Go to Pakistan. We have a very special guest today with us. With me is someone whose words always cut through the noise. Sabahat Zakariya, a Pakistani journalist who identifies as a writer, cultural critic, and a creator of iconoclastic videos. Her recent commentary on Pakistan Army Chief Asim Munir went viral for all the right reasons. It was sharp, fearless, and full of uncomfortable truths that needed to be said. Welcome, Sabahat. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So let's jump straight in. Pakistan Army Chief Asim Muni's recent comments last week about Muslims, Hindus, and the whole idea of national identity felt like both a throwback and a performance. So here's my first question. When the army chief starts talking in terms of us and them, drawing lines between Indian Muslims and Indian Hindus or between Muslims across borders, do you think it's coming from a place of genuine concern? Or is it more like a soft power flex, almost like saying, oh, you know what, we care about your Muslims more than you do, while sidestepping the complexities that are happening at home?
Well, considering that it seemed almost like a political rally, a whole auditorium, the number of people, the way they were responding, I feel probably it did seem more of a political flex. And definitely the idea is to somehow wrest the narrative into their own hands so that sort of the larger idea of Pakistan and who gets to control it remains with the army chief. So I think this whole emphasis on the two nation theory and everything is largely a matter of, well, making sure that people know with whom the power rests.
And then, there's also the contradiction that's hard to ignore. The Afghan refugees who are currently being deported while they are simultaneously, the army chief is here invoking Muslim solidarity in another country for whatever reasons, political or otherwise, like we talked about. What's going on here? What do you think? Is it a selective empathy or is it something deeper about, who qualifies as one of us or who qualifies as a Muslim?
Look, in many ways, all nation states have deep contradictions in their narratives that they are unable to smooth out. But people who want to run away with a certain narrative will ignore other parts of that narrative that may not make logical sense. So it's not like, the chief of army staff is the first or the last person to do this in the world or in Pakistan or India for that matter, right? Politicians now, the thing is that since he is not a politician, he is actually an army chief. This all becomes a little bit more complex. But the thing
Right.
is that essentially he is in this speech behaving like a politician because army chiefs are not generally expected to give such huge speeches to civilians and overseas Pakistanis. This is all sort of like civilian matters. Since he's and it's a long legacy in Pakistan of army chiefs meddling in civilian matters. So now then, in all for all intents and purposes, this is largely a political speech, right? So in political speeches, people will do exactly this. They will pick and choose. They will try to build a narrative according to whatever suits them and ignore whatever it is that is inconvenient. I did not talk about this in my video. A lot of people in response did say this, that what about Bangladesh? So he also obviously is never going to bring that up in this particular context because so many people say that the two nation theory died the day Bangladesh was born. So yeah, so there's very uncomfortable questions surrounding all of this that you would have to sidestep in order to build a certain kind of clean narrative. And over the years, this clean narrative has clearly been punctured by a lot of Pakistanis themselves. They may not perhaps state it as clearly as I may have done in my video, but I do notice that over this period of time, ever since the internet, when information has become much more easy to access, Pakistanis, a lot of sensible Pakistanis, and not just elite Pakistanis. I feel like a lot of Pakistanis who think about things have tried to reshape Pakistan's ideology away from the two nation theory. And in fact, there are a lot of people I know currently, they are also stepping into politics, like people like Zulfikar Ali Bhutto Jr., who seem to want to create a sense of the Pakistani identity through maybe the idea of the Indus, or things like that. The Indus Valley, and people have been trying in whatever shape or form they can to actually get away from the two nation theory, because me being of a certain age, I have seen a time when I was as a Punjabi in Pakistan in the 80s, when there was only one channel. I was not even aware of the presence of Pakistani Hindus within the country. I had no conception of that, right? But
Right.
over time, as we have, again, the means of communication have allowed us to see past our immediate surroundings, we have realized that the two nation theory can just not work in a society that is, despite it all, multi-religious, and obviously also multi-ethnic, multilingual. So this seems like something that a lot of people, a lot of my friends who responded to my video also said that it seems to hark back to Pakistan studies, like, oh, I read this in metric. That's the qualifying exam in Pakistan. So yeah, so I do feel that it definitely sounded very much like it was stuck in the past. It hardly sounded like a new narrative. Imran Khan, who also relied on similar right wing narratives, was actually perhaps able to do it slightly more cleverly than Hafiz Saab here. I think he just went all gung ho on the metric Pakistan studies course and didn't really have anything else to balance it out with.
Right. Which brings us to a question that I just wanted to ask you next was that, you know, in his speech, there was also a convenient nostalgia, like you're talking about the whole idea and a kind of a longing for an imagined Islamic unity. But that's the thing, what you just mentioned, that the elite are overseas and the working class or the class of people who are living in Pakistan right now are living with a certain sense of a harsh reality that they are facing on an everyday basis, and the dream that he seems to talk about is more outsourced. Do you think that even the military elite at this point, like we just talk about, believe in this two nation theory anymore, or is it just a convenient slogan that is more for the, more like a PR for the strong front that the army puts up?
Yes, I feel like perhaps it's a little bit hard to really believe in the two nation theory um, when you are a country of 97% Muslims, and so therefore you're not really actively threatened by any other religion at this point, at least within your geographical borders. But the other thing is that because of the world having shrunk in the way that it has, you also tend to internalize the the things that happen to Muslims elsewhere. So you can still build a narrative of, or and a genuine narrative of a victimhood, where you feel that Muslims are attacked in the world. So that kind of thing can then feed into these, well, what I would call right wing ideas. For instance, take the example of India itself, right? So the fact that India has moved so much to the right over our own lifetimes, liberals in Pakistan like me are unable to bring up India as an example of secularism in front of Pakistanis who make claims about the two nation theory and stuff like that. In fact, a lot of what has happened in India over time has actually, in many ways, strengthened people who make claims like the two nation theory. They're like, oh, look at cow slaughter, and look at Modi calling Muslims Ghuspetiyas, or there's just the idea of Muslims being outsiders in India itself. So Jinnah was right that he actually managed to secure at least some of these Muslims, if not all of them. So there is also some kind of genuine pushback from the other side as well, because of the fact that whatever at some point we were able to prop up as an example is no longer an example either. So yeah, obviously it is a means of gaining political power, of trying to create a narrative that is going to seemingly or supposedly make him popular among the masses. But really, a lot of it does definitely seem outdated.
Right. Like you also, I mean, this reminds me of what you say in your video that there are 20 million Muslims in India, there are 24 million Muslims in Pakistan. Do you mean that when you say that it's a us versus thing, then do you mean that you are willing to like bring them into Pakistan? And then the bigger question is, have you even cared to ask them if they actually want to come to Pakistan? And if you are saying that they are, they are different, they are of a different kind than us, then are you saying that okay, so you created a separate country and you are okay with the people from your country going around and mixing with overseas the white people, Christians, Americans, but you are not willing to do it with say Indians or Hindus who are culturally and more relatable to our idea of a culture and the way we do things. And also a very important question that you raised in your video, which struck me hard, was when you asked that what what then about the Muslims who chose to come to Pakistan? Are you just saying that those who are suited booted and who are like tip top like Jinnah are the elites who chose to stay back, whereas the working class chose to come to a separate nation just based on their religious identity? So I think you like you bring up a very important point. And his comments actually reminded me of something something a prominent Pakistani writer and journalist Mohammad Hanif also said in his recent video, which, let's be honest, was an absolute takedown of his speech. And he talks about the overseas Pakistani army chiefs right now, and then Pakistan's new Marde Momin, which is Asim Munir. And he says that when the general does not whip his stick, but rather gives speeches that often seem self written, like when he calls for an indefinite brain drain, which he sees as a brain gain, you should understand that his dry spell has started. And then he goes on to say that, like we were talking about Bangladesh, on similar lines, Hanif says that someone in his office should have told him not to say these things. People who have said it earlier didn't do well. Nothing changed for them, but our geography changed. Where I am guessing that he was probably referring to East Pakistan. And then there's that biting line where he says that I hope, unlike Ziaul Haq, his plane lands safely. And the part about Musharraf, Rahil Sharif, General Bajwa, that these are generals who either fled, were exiled, or now live like ghosts in their own country. And then he goes on to conclude by saying that those who clapped and cheered at his speech will laugh, eat, and then leave. But the country is here, the people are here, and they will remember. So I hope that Munir does not have to go overseas eventually, which his optics currently indicate. Now, Hanif spoke in proper Punjabi for BBC, and I'm just giving a rough translation. But Sabahat, do you agree with his sentiment? And if I might ask that, based on this, what is the mood of the nation right now when it comes to the military and to Munir specifically? What does the view look like from there?
Yeah, like I'm sure there cannot be just one mood to the nation. There are all sorts of people with all sorts of thought processes.
Right.
But at the moment, I feel like perhaps one of the segments, the huge segments that the army used to have behind it at one point in time, and that now no longer supports them, is that huge chunk of Pakistanis who are behind Imran Khan. So I do feel that in response to my video, for instance, it's like my enemy's enemy is my friend. Previously, where I do not see eye to eye with Imran Khan whatsoever, and have been vocally critical of him, and therefore have received a lot of hate and pushback from PTI supporters. But I noticed that this video was being shared a lot by PTI supporters themselves, right? Because again, their worldview seems to have
Align.
morphed, yes, ever since all that has happened to Imran Khan. So yes, so definitely, I feel like in that regard, keeping the PTI factor in mind, this is probably in my living memory the first time that the army has lost as much popularity as it has amongst Punjabis, amongst educated Punjabis, right? Now, that was something that, educated Punjabis would never really have said so vocally before, or even, questioning what were considered to be sacred ideas. Like, I would not expect somebody who is an PTI supporter to be sharing a video that is questioning the concept of the two nation theory. But somehow things have gone around full circle in such a strange way that there are a lot of people who then, first because they started questioning the army, so then because they have questioned the army, now they're questioning the narratives that are put forward by the army. And I'm very curious to see that if and when Imran Khan comes out of jail, how these will pan out. But I'm guessing that it's really going to not be very different, because ultimately, if you're a Pakistani, you have to live with the fact that you have to reconcile with the idea of being different from India. Otherwise, how do you justify its existence and all of that? But a lot of people also seem to have come to the realization, like, there are academic works around it. There's Aisha Jalal. There's a lot of ideas of, economic prosperity and constitutional, safeguards and things like that. So, ultimately, if you're going to conceive of Pakistan, you have to conceive of it as a separate nation state, as a lot of separate nation states exist in the world, like, prior to Trump, like Canada and America. Like, why were they different? They sounded like one country in most ways. So I just think that, we can conceive of this difference between India and Pakistan as difference between, like, they're two nation states. That's it. Like, why is Nepal different? Why is Bhutan different? Like, why is Sri Lanka different, for that matter, right? So it's fine. I mean, it's a country that exists, and that's that. Why do we have to give it such an ideological turn?
Absolutely. Which brings me to my next question is that, there was, in his speech, he quotes Iqbal, he invokes the Quran, he speaks of Medina, and he paints Pakistan, like you said, the ideological, the pointed ideological note. So he paints Pakistan as the ideological heir to Islamic history after Medina, the only state which is supposedly built on Islam. Now, we know Muni's Islamic credentials, he's a Hafiz Quran, and it's well known, but do you think that this speech, which was loaded with so much religious symbolism, was also designed to reassert the army's claim as the true guardian of Islamic ideology in contrast to someone else? And like we were discussing about what happens when Imran Khan comes out of jail, and these questions take up a new ideological shift, which brings me to my next question: that do you think, in your opinion, is this speech in some ways a counter to Imran Khan and his current popularity within the civil spaces and even to the military spaces up to some extent, when, especially now when he remains wildly popular, he, just like Imran Khan, he talks about this idea of Riyasat-e Madina, but from a very different lens. Do you think that Munir was, as the army chief, trying to rebrand that space for himself?
That's for sure. I would say from a very different lens. It's really the same lens. It's like, Kalma Tayyiba ki Riyasat versus Riyasat-e Medina. What's the difference? There's no difference. It's just that, he's tried to find a new word for it, because, that is the concept that he believes is going to sell, has sold. And everybody really in Pakistan is basically at this point in time trying to counter Imran Khan's narratives, right? He is the one he's the champion of the narrative. He's the one who has really given that sense of belonging, a sense of, unity to so many people across at least Punjab and KP. So, and these are the, provinces with a majority of the population in seats. So everybody in Pakistan, it's not just the chief of army staff, it's also Shahbaz Sharif and everybody else who is in power right now. They're trying to do is counter Imran Khan instead of bringing something new or fresh. They have absolutely no idea how to deal with the kind of image Imran Khan and the kind of narrative Imran Khan has been able to build. So at one point, we used to think that the PMLN is actually more friendly towards India, which, I mean, it may still be, I don't know. But the point is that, their whole narrative seemed to be more towards the center left at one point. But because of the fact that Imran Khan took the dial so much to the right, And now these people are like, they don't know what to do. They have no ability to take it back, because if they do, they are going to be perceived as, anti-Pakistan, anti-Islam, all of that. So they're just stuck now, having to counter Imran Khan's narratives. Now all of them are fighting in the right field to somehow gain that kind of
Which is
popularity.
also ironic because I mean Imran Khan was as much anti-Indian as I guess Asim Munir is, and the whole idea of being anti-American, anti-Indian, creating the Riyasat-e-Madina that he talks
Yeah,
about.
it's actually the same narrative. The funny bit is that despite the fact that he seems to hate Imran Khan, Mr. Asim Munir seems to hate Imran Khan as much as he does, his narrative is no different. I mean, it is not possible for him to come up with a new narrative. It's amazing that, this is definitely not a war of narratives. It's just a war between people and egos.
Absolutely. And Sabahat, that brings me to my last question. He says there's also a pointed attack on the media, and he then mocks the idea of criticism and says journalists are not verifying things; they are just forwarding things, forwarded as received, and that's not exactly subtle. As someone who is part of the media, what do you make of that jab, given that post the whole Imran Khan scenario, like we just talked about, there's this huge counter narrative that the army has put up. There's a huge, the image makeover, there's a PR going on. Do you think that this is part of the army's larger effort to control the narrative, or is it a reaction to losing grip of the narrative that they held on for so long?
Um, yeah, about the first bit, I'm not sure if the forwarded as received was actually meant for the media alone. Did he say that? I'm not quite sure. I felt like it was just generally him talking about the fact that, there are so many people now who can easily create and generate a narrative on their own, right? Call it WhatsApp University, call it whatever, but there's a lot of truth in a lot of these things as well. Like basically, they have the ability to push back, and that is what the army and just generally any authoritarian anywhere, whether it be in India or whether it be in Pakistan or in the US, is unable to deal with, because you have so many ways of communication now. There's simply no way that you can control the narrative in ways that you could control it in Zia Haq's time, right? So now this whole forwarded as received, and then the banning of Twitter and all of that, this is just him, speaking about the pain of them not being able to control people, right? That the fact is that he wants to discredit those people who are using alternate channels of communication in order to keep their narrative alive. But the thing is that they have tried very hard to crack down on it, and they're doing everything that they can to crack down on it. But unfortunately, it still seems to make its way out.
Absolutely. And I think that reflects very well in the way, people talk about what's happening in KP, Sindh, or Balochistan, which even he targeted in his speech that, it's the jewel on our crown. We'll not let people come and attack it. But then there's this idea of in his speech where he talks about the idea of brain drain as brain gain. And it almost sounds like a punchline, but do you think that is it in some twisted way the army's long-term strategy, like let them leave, wave the flag from abroad and keep the narrative going at home, and to for Asim Muni it's like proving a point that hey, look, overseas Pakistanis are so happy with us, they're clapping and cheering, but Pakistanis here are cribbing about our policies, so this is the spirit that you should carry on. What do you think?
Yes, I mean, considering remittances are a huge source of income for Pakistan, I mean, this whole brain drain, brain gain thing makes a practical sense in that regard. They have to court overseas Pakistanis, no matter what. I mean, they cannot afford to offend them. So, yeah, I guess there's that. First of all, so there's that whole thing about, yeah, you guys are not, you guys didn't leave us, you didn't desert us, you're actually still helping Pakistan and all of that. And it keeps the overseas Pakistanis also, it makes them feel important as well. And if they feel important, then obviously, the money flows. And so there is, that whole cycle. So I think a big part of that thing was to, again, counter Imran Khan, who is extremely popular among overseas Pakistanis. Just like any Indian I meet in the US is a Modi bhakt, any Pakistani I meet in the US is a big Imran Khan fan, right? So
I just wanted to like counter you here and just ask you a thing, that do you think that this is the reason why he chose to speak specifically to overseas Pakistanis and not the local press or a public rally?
like there would be actually no sense of him speaking in a public rally. He's not a politician, right? So why would he have a public rally to begin with? That would be very strange. But also speaking with journalists, again the same playbook, like the Indian prime minister doesn't speak with journalists, because when you speak to journalists, then they come up with actual and real questions. So you just talk to people who are going to soft lob questions at you, and then that's good. But in Mr. Asim Munir's case, he's not even a politician, right? So why would he speak with either? I mean, I know there's a precedence in Pakistan of army chiefs speaking with journalists, because obviously they've become presidents and prime ministers. But largely speaking, in a strict sense, there is really no sense in the army chief speaking to either journalists, or certainly at a political rally, or for that matter to overseas Pakistanis. Like, in what capacity is he speaking to overseas Pakistanis? Either, like, what does the army chief have to do with like this kind of civilian, back and forth? So yeah, and look at the audience. Shahbaz Sharif is sitting in the audience. All of these people are sitting there and just like watching him address Pakistani civilians. So yeah, it's pretty much an admission of the fact that it is de facto sort of martial law.
In the country.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much, Sabahat. Your take, as always, is like razor sharp and refreshingly honest. And I had so much pleasure talking to you, and I hope we get to do this soon again.
Thank you, Deb. Same here.